The weight of my father's funeral ring felt heavier than ever as I stood in the grand foyer of our family mansion, watching the last of the mourners drift away. The house, once alive with my dad's booming laugh, felt hollow, suffocating in its vastness. At 28, I never expected to be here, surrounded by empty champagne glasses and rehearsed condolences. My name is Cynthia, and I just buried my father. But as grief threatened to consume me, another battle loomed on the horizon, one I didn't even know I was walking into. Lexi, my stepmother, stood a few feet away, her black dress pristine, not a hair out of place. Despite the long day of performing grief, she was still poised, still calculating. Her voice was smooth as silk, but sharp as a knife. "Darling, you should freshen up. Your mascara is running." I barely glanced at her. "I'm fine." She sighed, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my shoulder. Her diamond rings caught the light. "We need to discuss the estate arrangements tomorrow. There are some financial matters that require immediate attention." I turned away. The house suddenly felt colder. Before I could respond, Mauricio, our butler of 20 years, appeared at my elbow, his usually unreadable expression tinged with something different: hesitation. "Miss Cynthia," he said quietly, "might I have a word? In private." Lexi's fingers tightened on my shoulder for a fraction of a second before she let go. "Of course, I'll be in the study if anyone needs me." The sharp click of her heels against the marble faded into the distance. Mauricio led me into the kitchen, glancing around before slipping something from his jacket pocket. A sealed envelope. The edges were slightly yellowed with age. "Your father asked me to give you this after the funeral." His voice was careful. He was very specific about the timing. I stared at the envelope. My hands trembled as I took it. "When did he give this to you?" 3 months ago, right before his diagnosis." His gaze held something I couldn't quite place. "He made me promise to ensure it reached you directly." With a deep breath, I broke the seal. Dad's familiar handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Cynthia, if you're reading this, I failed to tell you the truth in person, and for that, I'm sorry. The mansion, our home, belongs to you. It always has. Through a trust your mother established before she passed. Lexi doesn't know. The official will reading tomorrow will reveal everything, but I needed you to know first. Be careful, sweetheart. Watch the shadows. Love, Dad." My breath hitched. The mansion was mine. Lexi had no idea. My fingers tightened around the letter as I looked up at Mauricio. "Did you know about this?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I know many things, Miss Cynthia, including that Mrs. Bryant has been making calls to real estate agents this past week." A bitter laugh bubbled in my throat. She was trying to sell my house. Before I could respond, Francesca, my best friend, burst into the kitchen, her dark curls wild, her eyes sharp with concern. "There you are. Are you okay?" I swallowed hard. "No. Actually, I'm not okay at all." She grabbed my hands. "Talk to me." I squeezed her fingers, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad left me a letter. The mansion is mine, Fran. All of it. And Lexi's been trying to sell it behind my back." Her eyes widened. "That snake." She paced, her mind already working. "No wonder she's been hovering around that sleazy lawyer all day. What are you going to do?" From down the hall, voices drifted from the study. Lexi's and a man's. A voice I recognized instantly. Dan Parker. Our family lawyer. And the man who once asked me out and never quite got over my rejection. I exhaled sharply. Tomorrow they'll learn that the house they're trying to sell isn't theirs to sell. Francesca squeezed my arm. "Want me to stay tonight?" I shook my head, straightening my shoulders. "No, I need to face this alone." But first, I glanced toward the study. "I think it's time to see what's in Dad's safe." "Your father always said this place had more secrets than a confessional," Francesca whispered as we crept into Dad's study after midnight. The safe? It had been behind his desk for as long as I could remember, but he'd always kept it locked. "Do you know the combination?" Fran asked. I smiled, remembering Dad's cryptic words years ago. My birthday, Mom's birthday, and the day they met. The dial spun. Click. Inside were stacks of folders and documents, but what caught my eye was a USB drive labeled Insurance and a thick envelope with my name. I pulled out a stack of photos. They showed Lexi at various cafes and restaurants, meeting with different men. The dates on the back? 5 years ago, while Dad was still alive. Francesca peered over my shoulder. Is that Dan? Your father's lawyer, and James from the investment firm? My stomach churned. Dad knew. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. We froze. Quick, the safe, Fran hissed. We scrambled to put everything back, save for the USB and envelope. Just as the door swung open, Mauricio, I nearly collapsed with relief. Miss Cynthia, he murmured. Mrs. Bryant is awake. She's asking for you. Fran's eyes narrowed. At this hour? I exhaled, pocketing the USB and letter. I'll handle it. Fran nodded. Text me if you need backup. I squared my shoulders and made my way to the kitchen. Lexi sat at the island, an expensive silk robe draped over her frame, nursing a glass of scotch. She looked up, her expression cool. Couldn't sleep? I reached for a glass. Just getting water. She swirled the ice in her drink. We need to talk about tomorrow. I set the glass down. Oh, I agree. Lexi didn't know it yet, but her time in this house was already over. Lexi took a slow sip of her scotch, her fingers adorned with diamond rings that she hadn't even bothered to take off after the funeral. Her gaze was sharp, calculating. Your father left some substantial debts, Cynthia, she said smoothly. The mansion's upkeep alone is significant. I leaned against the counter, watching her. That's interesting. I took a deliberate pause. Because Dad's last financial statement showed the estate was completely solvent. Lexi's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched. You've been going through his papers? Oh, I've been doing a lot of things. She scoffed, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. Listen, darling, let's be practical. If we work together, we can... I pulled out my phone, opened the photo gallery, flipped the screen toward her. Photos. Dozens of them. Lexi meeting with Dan, with James, with real estate agents. Some as far back as 5 years ago. She turned pale. I tilted my head. Care to explain these? She swiped through them in silence, her grip tightening around my phone. Where did you get these? Dad wasn't as oblivious as you thought. I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. He knew about your meetings, your attempts to manipulate his finances, your plan to sell this house the moment the will was read. Her breath hitched just for a second. Then she let out a brittle laugh. You really think you're clever, don't you? No, I corrected. I think Dad was. Silence stretched between us. Then, just as quickly, Lexi straightened, regaining that carefully crafted poise. This isn't as simple as you think, Cynthia. Your father was sick. He was making reckless financial decisions. I was trying to protect our legacy by forging his signature on loan documents. The color drained from her face. I reached into my dress pocket and pulled out Dad's letter, unfolding it slowly. By the way, I continued, my voice calm, he left me a note before he passed. Turns out, I don't have to fight you for this house. I slid the letter across the counter. It was never yours to begin with. Lexi's hands trembled as she read. Then, for the first time since I'd known her, she lost control. She threw her glass against the wall. Shards of crystal exploded across the kitchen. You ungrateful little... She caught herself, inhaling sharply. Her voice smoothed out, but her fingers were still clenched into fists. This isn't over. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. No, it's not, but I'd start packing if I were you. Lexi's breath hitched. You wouldn't... Security will be here first thing in the morning. I turned toward the hallway, my father's ring glinting under the kitchen lights. Sleep well, Lexi. The morning sunlight flooded through the stained glass windows of the estate's grand parlor, casting fractured colors across the antique furniture. I sat stiffly in one of the high-backed chairs, Francesca beside me, Raphael on my other side. Across from us, Lexi perched like a queen, her black dress impeccable, her composure restored. Beside her sat Dan Parker, the lawyer she thought was going to save her. A man who, by the end of this meeting, would regret ever getting involved with her. The senior partner from Dad's law firm stood at the center of the room, adjusting his glasses. Before we begin, he said, Edward Bryant made an unusual request regarding this reading. Lexi's perfect smile flickered. Unusual how? The lawyer nodded to his assistant, who placed a laptop on the desk. He requested a video be played first. A hush fell over the room as the screen brightened. And then, my father's face appeared. Healthy. Strong. 6 months ago. The room went silent. If you're watching this, Dad's voice filled the air, then I'm gone. And Lexi, my dear, you're probably wondering why I let you believe you'd inherit everything. Lexi's hands gripped the arms of her chair. The truth is, I needed to see how far you'd go. The surveillance photos, the recorded meetings, the forged documents, he knew. He had always known. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Dad's voice softened. "Cynthia, sweetheart, I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything while I could, but I needed proof. Proof that's now in the hands of my lawyers and the FBI." Lexi shot to her feet. "This is absurd. He was sick, delusional." Raphael's voice cut through the chaos. "Sit down, Lexi." She didn't. She couldn't. Because the moment the video ended, the lawyer stood and said, "I should note that federal agents are currently executing search warrants at multiple locations, including Mr. Parker's office and Mrs. Bryant's private residence." Dan went white. Lexi swayed on her feet. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked. "I made this family what it is." "No," I said, rising from my seat. "You tried to steal it." The doors burst open and 2 FBI agents stepped inside. "Mrs. Bryant," one of them said, "you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted judicial manipulation." Lexi's breath hitched. She turned to me, mascara smearing beneath her eyes. "You'll regret this." I tilted my head. "No, Lexi, I won't." As they led her out, the weight of my father's words settled over me. The house was mine. The legacy was mine. And the real battle? It was just beginning. Lexi's screams echoed through the mansion as the FBI agents led her outside. "You'll regret this. You're nothing without me." I followed them as far as the front doors, arms crossed, watching with cold satisfaction as the woman who had spent years manipulating my father was stuffed into the back of a black SUV. Dan Parker, her lapdog lawyer, was nowhere to be seen. The moment the feds showed up, he ran like a cockroach when the lights come on. Raphael stood beside me, hands in his pockets. "Think she'll cut a deal?" he murmured. I exhaled sharply. "Lexi doesn't know how to quit." Francesca's voice cut in behind us. "Well, she's going to have to learn, because for the first time in her life, she's out of moves." The mansion gates closed behind the FBI convoy. And just like that, Lexi was gone. But somehow, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. 3 days after the will reading, at exactly midnight, I was in my father's study reviewing financial documents when the doorbell rang. Mauricio appeared in the doorway, his usual composed expression tight with concern. "Miss Cynthia," he said hesitantly, "you have a visitor." I frowned. "At this hour?" His hesitation deepened. "It's your sister, Meline." A chill ran through me. My half-sister, the one who had cut ties with us years ago after a bitter fight with Dad. I hadn't seen her since. I swallowed hard. "Send her in." Moments later, Meline swept into the room like a storm. Designer clothes, sharp edges, Dad's eyes, Lexi's ruthless posture. "Well, well," she said, dropping into one of the leather chairs. "Quite the show you put on the other day. Bravo." I folded my arms. "What do you want, Meline?" She smirked. "Can't a girl visit her sister, especially when said sister just had their mutual stepmother arrested for fraud?" "Half-sister," I corrected. "And Lexi wasn't arrested. She's under investigation." Her smirk widened. Same difference. I didn't trust her. Not for a second. But then she pulled out her phone and slid it across the desk. Text messages. Dozens of them. From Lexi. "Meline, we need to talk. Call me SAP. I have an idea. I just need a little help. We can still win this. Don't ignore me. I know things Cynthia doesn't." My stomach tightened. Meline watched me carefully. She called me. Her voice was quieter now. Wanted me to help her prove Dad was mentally incompetent when he made those videos. My heart stopped. "And?" Meline exhaled, leaning back. "I told her to go to hell." For the first time, I faltered. Why? She hesitated. Then, for the first time in years, Malene looked conflicted because I was wrong about Dad. She swallowed hard. I left because of her, because I saw what she was doing. I just didn't know how to stop it back then. Silence. Then, finally, I asked, "Why are you here, Malene?" She exhaled sharply, her fingers tapping against the leather armrest. "Because Mom isn't done." And then she pulled out something else. A USB drive, just like Dad's. She set it on my desk. Mom kept records of everything, her real insurance. I stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. Malene's voice was quieter now. "I found them last year when I was cleaning out her condo. Offshore accounts, other families, other husbands. This isn't just about Dad, Cynthia." A realization settled over me like ice. Lexi wasn't just a gold digger, she was a professional con artist. At exactly 11:30 a.m. the next day, Mauricio walked into the study, his usually stoic expression even tighter than usual. "Miss Cynthia," he murmured. "Mrs. Bryant is at the front gate." My stomach flipped. "Lexi." I turned to Malene. "You said she wasn't done." She nodded grimly. "And I meant it." I inhaled sharply. "Let her in." Minutes later, Lexi strode into the mansion, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit. If the handcuffs and FBI investigation had rattled her, she didn't show it. 2 lawyers flanked her. Raphael stepped forward immediately. "What the hell is this?" Lexi smiled. That same condescending, polished smile she always used when she thought she was in control. "Oh, Raphael, always so dramatic." She turned to me. "Cynthia, darling," I crossed my arms. "Cut the act, Lexi." Her smile never wavered. "Let's talk." We sat in the grand parlor, a massive legal folder placed between us. Lexi tapped her manicured nails against the table. "You have no idea what you're up against." I leaned forward. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" She smirked. "Drop the charges. I walk away. No legal battle, no scandal, and your father's precious legacy stays intact." I blinked. Then I laughed. Lexi's eyes flickered with irritation. "You think this is funny? I think it's pathetic." I reached into my pocket and pulled out Malene's USB drive. Lexi's breath hitched. She recognized it. She knew what was on it. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Every offshore account, every scam, every family you destroyed." Lexi's composure shattered. "Where did you get that?" I smiled. "You always underestimated me, Lexi." Silence. Then her jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." I stood. "No, the only mistake was letting you stay in this family for as long as we did." I nodded toward the door. "You can leave now." She stood, trembling with rage. "You think you've won?" I didn't even hesitate. "No, I know I have." She didn't say another word. She just walked out of the mansion, for the last time. A week later, I stood in the garden, watching the sun set over the mansion my mother built. Raphael, Francesca, and Malene stood beside me. For the first time, the house felt light again. It was ours, and Lexi Bryant's reign was over, for good.